Hey everyone, Nicky Skevich here with Daily Fantasy Winners, bringing you the next episode of Tee to Green here, and it's going to be for the AT&T Pebble Beach Pro-Am this week. It is a tournament that is at one of the nicest golf courses and one of the nicest areas just overall in the United States, maybe the world, and probably the world, and it is at Pebble Beach Golf Links, obviously, Monterey Peninsula area. There are 3 different golf courses used between Pebble Beach Golf Links, Monterey Peninsula Country Club, and then Spyglass Hill as well. So this is a tournament that's just like the Career Builder Challenge. We've got a cut after Saturday's round, 3 different golf courses used, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, 18 holes at each place, and then the cut is applied, and then we've got 18 holes at Pebble Beach on Sunday. It's like that every single year. It's just a similar format to what the Career Builder is like from just a few weeks ago. And so this is the last tournament here, finally, where we got tournaments where we're using multiple courses, and I'll just bring this up right now before we get into the top price golfers. AT&T Pebble Beach Pro-Am, it is the second shortest course on tour, and quite frankly, it is a par 71, but just keep in mind we are averaging this out with 3 different golf courses between 50% Pebble Beach, 25% Spyglass Hill, and 25% Monterey Peninsula. So not exactly sure how that would fall in exactly, but one way or the other, it is one of the shortest. It is the second shortest tournament and one of the shortest just overall from all the courses used on tour. So it's not like we've got a huge difference in distance here between the 3 golf courses. The other thing I'll just point out here is if you do take a look at from an eagles standpoint, this is a course that does tend to give up quite a few eagles actually. If you look here, there it looks like they're tied with the Genesis Riviera, which is actually next week, believe it or not. And so they're tied for 9th in terms of giving up the most eagles at 0.1. So this just simply means the average golfer here is going to have a 10% chance at making an eagle in his round, or in an 18-hole round, to be specific, in case you missed maybe one of the previous episodes on how this sheet works. So this is one of the shortest courses, or shortest one of the tournaments that has the shortest courses, and this obviously gives up a lot of eagles, but it's not a tournament where driving distance is really going to help you here. There's a lot of holes that you really just can't hit driver on, or it's not necessarily the best option, or the way the par 5 set up, they're just not really that long, or maybe the way they just set up, they're not really holes you can go 4 and 2. It's just there will be eagles. It's not really one where driving distance is going to gain you much of an edge here. So just wanted to point that out as far as if you're looking at this sheet and just wondering maybe what the strategy here is. I just wanted to point that out. And so I think that is it as far as anything that needs to be noted here before we get started. And so let's just get right on into the top golfers. We've got Dustin Johnson, John Rahm, Rory McIlroy, Jason Day, Jordan Spieth. This is a tournament that usually does have a few of the top names, but this is a little bit more top-heavy than past years, I believe. And so that's it's good to see. I think Rory's playing here for the first time. Obviously, John Rahm's one of the top players right now, so he's back here for his 2nd time. Dustin Johnson usually does typically play here frequently, as does Jason Day and Jordan Spieth. So we're getting a few of the top names added here, which is good to see. And then along with Phil and Gary Woodland winning last week is awesome, and then Paul Casey, Brandon Grace making his first appearance here as well. So that's pretty good. And Matt Kuchar, Patrick Cantlay, Rising Star, Adam Scott, like these are all really good names here as far as the top players go. But the one thing I will say here is while the mid-tier price players is relatively decent, or it's at least average, and that's kind of typical for here, the bottom tier price players at this tournament, not necessarily everybody, you're going to find a few oddballs that are just like, Graham McDowell and Russell Henley. They're really cheap on DraftKings this week, like near the bottom for whatever reason. But as far, you will see a lot of the cheap price players be guys that are basically semi-retired, or they're only like part-time players, or they're kind of like borderline champion, or getting ready for the Champions Tour type of a thing, like guys that are well past their prime. We're talking guys like Mike Weir, David Duval, Peter Jacobson's in this, and then like Vijay Singh, Ernie Els, like those types of players, and just some other then there's some other just like random names you maybe never even heard of. And so the bottom of this tournament usually is very weak, and so as far as the top players are concerned, they usually do pretty well here. Just because this field, while it is 150 some players, you can kind of weed out some of the bottom names here pretty easily, and so to speak. And so I just wanted to point that out. Top names usually do pretty well here from a consistency standpoint. And so, anyways, all right, we'll get into the top players. Dustin Johnson at 11,700. Obviously, Dustin is playing extremely well. He statistically is off the charts everywhere. He is first in strokes gained tee to green, first strokes gained off the tee, 27th in approaching the greens, 8th around the green, and 20th strokes gained putting. So he is killing it everywhere. The only negative thing I could technically say about DJ is that his putter is running really hot, because Dustin historically has not been a top 20 putter. Right now, according to our putting regression tool model, he's at a minus 0.62. So Dustin is running hot with the putter, but he's playing extremely well everywhere else. And Dustin is a phenomenal tee to green player. So there's really nothing to knock about Dustin really right now. Usually when you want to knock somebody for having a running hot with the putter, it's that the tee to green game is off, or where it typically might be for somebody, and so that's where that might come into play, and where you might see some worse results coming. But as far as DJ goes, I think everybody would be stunned if Dustin didn't finish at least near the top of the leaderboard at this tournament. And so even though the driving distance isn't like a huge thing here, it's not like it's a negative thing. It just doesn't help you here. So Dustin doesn't have like the length advantage, but it's not like it's a negative thing either. Dustin's played here 10 times. He's made the cut 9 of those 10 times. 7 of those 10 appearances have resulted in top 10. So that gives you a pretty good idea how well Dustin's done here before. Even going back to the U.S. Open in 2010, Dustin was leading quite handily after 3 rounds, and unfortunately had an abysmal Sunday. But Dustin historically has done very well here at Pebble Beach with this tournament. He knows the 3 courses well. I don't think course history here means a ton, but I do think playing here, having played in this tournament maybe once, does help, just because this isn't a tournament you're going to go play a bunch of practice rounds at, and you're playing 3 different golf courses. So if you're coming here for the first time, that's not necessarily like my favorite thing to look at here when you're getting to play here, when you're playing 3 different golf courses. So just for my 2 cents on that, it's not like it's a huge negative, but it's just one little slight negative thing, I guess I would, just a slight little knock, I guess, if you will. So I just point that out, but that Dustin doesn't have that, obviously. So everything to like about Dustin. He's the odds-on favorite. Cash, GPPs, the whole thing. I go for it. John Rahm here at 11,400. All of a sudden, Rahm quietly, I didn't really realize this. I thought it was maybe a little bit of an issue at first, but it's not getting any better. But John Rahm is 131st in strokes gained approaching the green. If there is a statistic that correlates to this tournament being successful, it is strokes gained approaching the green. And that makes a lot of sense, because this isn't a long golf course where driving the ball is a huge premium. And these are smaller greens, especially at Pebble Beach. And so you really need to be good with your iron play and your wedge play. And Rahm really hasn't been that sharp with it. And this isn't, yes, is it a small sample size? Yes, it is, and it's early on in the year. But John Rahm has played every single week so far here in 2018, with the exception of the Sony Open. So he's played the last 3 weeks and 4 of the last 5, and Rahm's still kind of struggling here. So it does mean a little more that Rahm is struggling, I think, as opposed to some of these other guys here as far as the early sample size goes. So as far as Rahm, comparing him to DJ and to Rory and everything like that, I'd rather have DJ's definitely than John Rahm. DJ's only 300 more on DraftKings and 400 more on FanDuel. That's perfectly fine. I think it's worth it there. John Rahm did play well here last year, for what it's worth. He finished tied for 5th. It was the first time he had played in this, and so maybe the whole playing here, having some experience here, it doesn't mean as much maybe for the top players as opposed to maybe the mid-tier price players, so to speak. But still, again, if we're just talking about who would I rather have between DJ and Rahm, or Rahm and Rory, I'd rather go against Rahm on this. Rahm, I'm sure, will still get some decent ownership, because the results for Rahm have been pretty solid here. If we take a very quick look here, Rahm, he ended up finishing tied for 11th at Phoenix last week after falling off a little bit. So kind of did the same thing at the Farmers Insurance Open. He fell off to T29, and obviously he won at the Career Builder and then finished 2nd in Kapalua. But still, so I just think because of John Rahm's, it's the approaching the green and not the putter that's letting him down. If it was the putter that he was just getting unlucky with, then I would be looking more into this, so to speak, of backing Rahm. But I probably wouldn't be looking to back Rahm here as much. Obviously, if you're making a ton of lineups, I'm not saying to fade him by any means. But if it's one of those things where you're only making a couple GPP lineups, or you're just you're playing cash lineups, I'd probably look elsewhere. For what it's worth, John Rahm is at a minus 0.33 in our strokes gained putting model. That's not John Rahm's not the best example for it, just because this is only his second full year on tour, and this model works better usually for players that have been on tour for a few years. But for what it's worth, Rahm gained .274 strokes putting last year in 2017, and for this year he's gaining .451. So Rahm is well above average so far this year, and he's been pretty decent. And so if you expect Rahm is one of the best putters on tour, then I would say, okay, then the putting thing isn't that big of a deal. But if you think Rahm is just an average putter, or he's just a little above average, then he is running a little bit hot. And then that strokes gained approaching the green, either way, really should concern you just a little bit here until Rahm kind of shows he kicks that into gear. So anyways, enough on that. Moving on to Rory. The only thing negative I can say here about Rory is that this is his first time playing here. Again, I don't know if that's really, and I'm saying this more of as an opinion. I don't have something factual to back this up as far as, like, does it matter that there are 3 courses being used here? Does that really hurt first-timers here? I don't know if there's something that statistically shows up for that. I haven't been able to figure that out. My guess, though, is if it does, it probably shows up with the golfers that aren't quite as good near the top of their games, especially when we're talking about a field here where it's really weak at the bottom, like I mentioned before. So it's probably not that big of a deal that this is Rory's first time here, but I will say this: Rory's going to be owned the most of the top 5 players here on DraftKings, and maybe not so much. Well, actually on FanDuel, he is the 5th most expensive. So yeah, I'd actually be willing to guess here that Rory will be the most owned here on DraftKings and FanDuel. Rory is very popular, usually a lot of the time in the DFS world, being the 3rd most expensive on DraftKings here at $11,100, and then the 5th most expensive on FanDuel at $12K. I think that's going to appeal to a lot of people. For those of you that, for whatever reason, haven't paid attention to Rory over on the European Tour, his last 2 tournaments, the only 2 tournaments he's played in actually for as far as 2018 goes, he finished 2nd at the at Omega Dubai Desert Classic. That was one where Haotong Lee just played fantastic golf on the final day, and Lee made a fantastic putt on the final hole to beat Rory by 1. That wasn't a matter of like, oh, Rory lost the tournament. That was just Haotong Lee playing tremendous golf and just edged him by 1 and went toe-to-toe with him. And then the week before that, Rory finished 3rd at Abu Dhabi, which is just fantastic, obviously. And that's a pretty good field over there. So Rory, as far as the form goes, looks great. Unfortunately, we don't have anything from the strokes gained statistics goes for Rory, just because he's been playing over in Europe, and you need the PGA Tour stats for the strokes gained statistics to count. So that's the unfortunate thing as far as that goes. But I do believe from listening to a couple of the podcasts, a couple of the podcasts that Rory has been on, he'll be playing a little bit more on the PGA Tour this year. So we should get some good data here for Rory here, hopefully in the near future, as far as looking at some of the strokes gained stuff. So bottom line here for Rory, as far as FanDuel goes, I think he's fine in cash and GPPs. For DraftKings, I would probably, because you're getting a little bit of a better discount here with Jordan Spieth, and I'll touch on Spieth here, why I like Spieth still a lot this week in a second. But for DraftKings, if you could stack DJ and Spieth, I think that's a great idea, and I'll get a little bit more in here in a second. But if you're not going to if you don't want to pay up for DJ for whatever reason, or you just for whatever reason are turned off by Spieth, I think Rory is your 3rd best option, so to speak. As far as like just ranking the players this week, I would go DJ, Spieth, Rory. Rahm and Day are probably 4A and 4B for me, and I'll touch on the last 2 guys here in a second. But I think Rory is a little bit more fine in cash on the FanDuel side, just on the DraftKings side, just from a slight value standpoint. But as far as GPPs go, he's obviously fine on both sides. That should go without saying. So on to Jason Day. Kind of a similar story here to John Rahm, just in that the strokes gained approaching the green for Jason Day is 158th. Now that doesn't mean quite as much for Day, just because he hasn't played as much as John Rahm has, especially as of late. Jason Day obviously he won at the Farmers Insurance Open at Torrey Pines, and then he hasn't played since then. Or the last time he played before that was at the HSBC over in China back on October 25th. So this strokes gained approaching the green thing does not matter nearly as much for Jason Day. But the reason probably why I'm a little bit more hesitant on Day, and for those of you that have followed my stuff, I'm a pretty big Jason Day fan. I usually recommend him probably more than just about anybody out there. The reason why I'm hesitating a little bit on Jason Day is just because the putter is running a little bit hot for him in the very early going. The strokes gained approaching the green's a little bit off, but also just the health thing. It's, I know he won the tournament and he played fantastically, and I was pretty much openly rooting for him. But at the same time, I would just say that when you have a when he's almost withdrew from that tournament, and he was slapping the ball around all over the place on Thursday's round at Torrey Pines, that's just a little concerning that maybe he's going to be trying to play here 2 weeks later. He'll probably play through, and actually if you look at how often Jason Day withdraws, he withdraws about just as much as like a lot of the other top players in the game. Not necessarily like Spieth. Spieth never seems to withdraw, or types of things like that, but there's a couple guys that are always just seem to be health free. But if you actually look at how frequently players withdraw, Day isn't like a huge outlier. But it's not a good idea when you hear he's got a bad back 2 weeks prior and you have these other good options at the top. So I definitely wouldn't touch Jason Day in cash. I think you can play him a little bit in GPPs if you're making a bunch of lineups. I think that's fine. He just doesn't have the length advantage here. That's just probably another thing of why I wouldn't look into risking Day too much here, like Torrey Pines, where Jason Day has where length is a huge advantage to have for that golf course. You just don't get that here. So probably just would sprinkle the ownership on Jason Day if you're making a bunch of lineups, something like that. So lastly, with Jordan Spieth, this is straightforward for Spieth. If you look at his strokes gained statistics, it is pretty astonishing if you look at it. Jordan Spieth, 4th in strokes gained tee to green, 24th and off the tee, which is usually his bugaboo. Like, that's usually the thing he can struggle at a little bit sometimes. He's 24th and off the tee. He's 20th in approaching the green. He's 11th around the green. He is 195th in strokes gained putting. That is not going to happen. I know I said that last time, and he ended up missing the cut. I'm not going to back down from that. I would have no regrets about playing Spieth, and I would have no regrets about playing him again this week one way or the other. That's just something that's not going to continue. He is proven statistically over his young but like kind of well-established career at this point. I mean, Jordan Spieth here, if you do look at his strokes gained putting numbers here over the last few years, I'll just read them out. 2017, he gained .32 strokes. 2016, he gained .758. In 2015, he gained .571. And in 2014, he gained .4. So he's clearly shown he is at least a decent putter, if not a great putter. He is at least the best mid-range putter, because Spieth makes more mid-range putts than just about anybody else. Short range, it's maybe a little bit slightly different, but Spieth is losing .918 right now. So that is just not sustainable. And all the other areas of his game look sharp. Spieth has played well here at Pebble Beach. If you want to look at that, he is the defending champion, of course, as well. That's always nice. But his other finishes here: tied for 21st, tied for 7th, tied for 4th, tied for 22nd. Spieth's always played well here. So, and again, driving distance is a huge edge. And not that Spieth is a short hitter, but he's not a bomber here either. So, give me Spieth's wedge and short iron play here every time that the putting's going to turn around, because that seems to be the good play here. And it's kind of funny here just a little bit, and just because Jordan Spieth has been a guy historically, I've said be cautious of him a little bit when his putter's going extremely hot and the iron play isn't working out, but it's completely flipped here right now. And so you just got to play to the regression, and you got to be flexible with when the best plays are kind of at the right time. So anyways, bottom line, my recommendations here, Dustin Johnson, Jordan Spieth are the two best plays here, in my estimation here, for both cash and GPP. If you really want to get in Rory in those lineups, that's perfectly fine as well. I'm just warning you, I think Rory will be owned quite a bit here on both websites. I'm sure DJ will be owned quite a bit too, just because he's been crushing it. Spieth's ownership is going to be a little bit interesting. I think it's going to be lower on FanDuel just because he's a little bit more expensive and cheaper on DraftKings. DraftKings will be fascinating just because he is coming in that cheap. But I do wonder if people are going to look at Spieth's recent performance and just look at the results, not the statistics, but just the results. Excuse me, and not like what they see. So I don't think Spieth's ownership will be too low or too high. It'll just be kind of in that, DraftKings, 15%, something like that. It won't be too anything out of control. Maybe as low as like 11 or 12, just because there's enough top names here. So we'll see about that. I'll just throw this in as a bonus here. I really do like Paul Casey this week, especially on DraftKings, just because you get much better prices for some of these guys here that are below like the top handful of guys on DraftKings than you do on FanDuel, obviously. And so Paul Casey would be the guy I would certainly look to in this 9K range on DraftKings. I definitely like him as well. In case you want to do DJ and Casey per se, or maybe you want to do Rory, Spieth, and Casey or something like that, if you just don't want to load up on those couple top guys. So I'll just throw that in there as a bonus, and that is it for this week. Sorry, running out of breath there. Hopefully I didn't talk too fast. Thanks for watching. I'm at Nikiskevich on Twitter. Daily Fantasy Winners is on Twitter, at DFantasyWinners. And of course, we appreciate all the likes to our YouTube videos and the subscriptions to the channel. And good luck, everybody.